For here we are not afraid to follow truth wherever it may lead, nor to tolerate any error so long as reason is left free to combat it.
Welcome to Virginia Viewpoints. Our guest today is one of Hollywood's most eminent directors, Mr. Frank Capra, a winner of numerous Academy Awards, and for a long time a man who had more Academy Awards to his credit on one film than had been equaled in Hollywood. And well, that's one of the things I think we can talk about, Mr. Capra. You, of course, have also compiled a very impressive record of Academy Award nominations and an also equally impressive number of wins. Tell us about the one picture that has won more Academy Awards than any other, at least up until 1950.
Well, that picture you're referring to is It Happened One Night. And that got, let's say, the five major, well, not so much major, because all Academy Awards are major to those that get them, but perhaps the five most talked about awards: the Best Picture, the Best Directing, Best Writing, Best Actor, Best Actress, all five of those. The only film so far to have been honored with those five awards in one film.
Now, you've written probably one of the best film autobiographies that's ever been written, called Frank Capra, the name above the title. A large book and a very, very interesting book, one which makes great reading. And for much of it, you have talked a great deal about yourself and your background, the kind of films you made, and the reason you made them. And coming across very clearly in the book is a great desire for Academy Awards. This was something that in the early days you were extremely interested in. How many altogether did you win?
Well, I won 2 for Best Picture, 3 for Best Directing, and 1 for Best Documentary. Yes, we all had desires for Academy Award. Mine was not an overriding one in the sense that I had any more desire than anybody else, but that, in our estimation, was the ultima thule of applause, and when we were honored by our own peers.
The Academy Awards seem to trace, in some sense, the complexity of film. Academy Awards started with approximately 12 categories, then they quickly dropped to 7 categories. They rose to 26 categories by 1942 and a high of 28 in 1949, and it's been about 24 or more every year since then. Things like not just Best Director, Best Actor and such, but they began to go into Best Color Work, Best Black and White Work for photography and this sort of thing. Does this indicate that films were becoming more and more complicated and more difficult to produce? Or does it indicate, in a sense, that they were becoming easier to produce because there was more expertise required, there was more equipment available?
Well, the equipment and the expertise is a phenomenal thing that's happened in Hollywood. That is probably more advancement in the science than there have been in the arts, certainly. And they are the greatest brains in making films work and making films possible in Hollywood than ever assembled in any other kind of a business, really. So we were honoring, in a sense, the science, the Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the arts were always honored to begin with, but we began to also honor the sciences in many categories of sciences: camera, sound, film, and even the manufacturing of film. They were always doing tremendous research work to advance the whole science of motion pictures. So we were engaged in honoring the sciences along with the arts. And that's why it proliferated in those kind of awards.
A director is a general, and supposedly when a general is working with privates, his authority is more easily accepted and is more absolute. In the later days, when you're working with a series of people who in themselves have had many, many years' experience and are experts in sound and photography and whatnot, the general is working with lieutenant generals. He's working with colonels. Would you find that being a director in the later days was easier or harder than in the early days?
Oh, I don't think so. I think the directing has been constantly made easier because more and more expert people helping. The time when you had to actually invent a great many things, like at one time I had to make a miniature of a submarine underwater, and I had to do it with a toy little submarine that I found at a candy store. Those kind of things that later on were helped by big departments that we had, special effects departments. We didn't have to go through that kind of trauma, you know, making things do with nothing. But so the better their help, the easier it is for the director.
Inventive genius was really your stepping stone into film, was it not? Gag lines for or gag situations.
Inventive,
for our
perhaps, yes, inventiveness, and a lot of gall. That helped too.
One of the things that has come up over the years to take a more and more important role is motion picture film. Motion pictures originally intended to entertain audiences and make money, and they found their way into an academic setting where they form the content of film appreciation courses. Let's talk for a minute about academic film. From your point of view, what criteria should students of film employ in evaluating motion pictures?
Well, film is an art form, perhaps the greatest art form ever created. It uses most of the other classic art forms as tools. It is so big and it has no limits whatever as an art form. So naturally, that's the first thing you should evaluate. Is a film as an artistic creation, or is it not an artistic creation? But it's also a dichotomy of art and money. And money is just as practically just as important. Well, money is as important as the artistic part of it, because without money you can't do the other. So we have an art form that is not just you and a piece of paper and a pencil, not just you and some canvas and some paints, not just you and a hammer and a chisel and some marble. It's you and a whole army of people and about $4 or $5 million to spend. That is your problem. Your problem is how do you keep making films when you have to spend $4 million on them? You only keep making films by being able to recoup that amount of money and perhaps a profit. So there is a profit motive in making of films that is absolutely necessary to their existence. And this is where we have our problems. Because it is a dichotomy of art and money, and they speak different languages.
Let's touch for just a moment on what I mentioned before, music in films. The study of music in films has become an important thing, almost as important today as a study of some of the earlier films. For instance, there's a Max Steiner Film Society now, which is fairly active.
Yes.
An international organization. What do you feel music's purpose should be in film? We're talking about comedy and dramatic films rather than musicals.
Music's purpose is to aid the film in its moods and its storytelling, lay a groundwork for storytelling. It should help the film. Music should not be seen or heard on its own accord when it's made for a film. In other words, it's not a composition that can be played, should be played separately. It can be played separately, and many have been played separately, but not its original intention is as an aid to the film, not a direct performance of itself and not to be heard without it. And this, of course, Steiner knew very well. The reason he was so successful was that he was the first real person in music to understand that music was to help the film and not the film to help the music.
He was also unusually prolific. I understand he had more than 450 films.
Very prolific, because everybody wanted him, because he knew what to do with music. Now, there were many musicians who thought the film was a vehicle for their music. Then, of course, they found out it wasn't.
When film music buffs get together, the score for Lost Horizons is inevitably discussed.
Yes.
Could you tell us how this score came to be created? Your friend Dmitri Tiomkin wrote
Well,
the score.
I
and you
had met
Steiner
Dmitri
direct.
Tiomkin, and he had never scored a film in his life. I think he had something to do with Great Waltz before that, but not really an entire job on his own shoulders. And this Lost Horizon was something that pretty far out, and I wanted music that I thought would fit that whole Shangri-La thing, that whole Tibetan thing. And here is Dmitri Tiomkin that knows Russian music, that knows music of the with Asian sources, and I thought he should do it. I thought he could do it. Now, he'd never done a film in his life. And this is Columbia's most important film, and to give it to a musician to score who had never scored a film before was really, asinine, really, to everybody else, and it should have been, and it really was, except that I had a hunch he could do it, and I insisted that he do it. And I remember he tried to play the themes for me. He wanted me to, and I said, no, I don't want to hear any themes. I want this to be entirely your music, not mine, because then I would get my ideas in there and screw it up completely. I'd had some other idea. But I did hedge it by one way. I mean, tried to cop a bet there. I got Max Steiner to conduct the music. And if Max Steiner, if the music didn't fit, or if it was completely unusable, he would be there to fill in and make the score. So that was my cop-out. Well, came the day when they were rehearsing the main title. I hadn't heard one note of the music, and I was really, on pins and needles about it. And I was waiting for Max Steiner's opinion of it. Now, Max Steiner called me and he said, "We're going to rehearse the music of the first title. You better come over here and listen to it. He said, you'll be surprised." So I've sneaked into the music stage, hid in the shadows, and listened to one rehearsal. And I knew we had a tremendous score coming up.
Lost Horizon hasn't been shown in quite some time, and there's been a rumor about that there are no existing prints of Lost Horizon. Do you know if this is true?
The prints have been recalled because they have made a sequel, not a sequel, but a remake of Lost Horizon as a musical. Columbia and it's now playing. And I suppose when that gets finished, the original Lost Horizon will be available again to schools and to societies that want to see it.
What about film archives? Out here we get the impression that many films are just no longer available. They've been totally lost. Is there an original negative of all of these films in a film archive somewhere, being safe, kept at the proper temperature? and
No,
humidity?
not of all the films. Unfortunately, many films have been lost. Many negatives have been burned, and many prints have been destroyed, so that there's no remaining print or negative of many films, many early films.
You've got approximately, 30 feature films that you've...
About 40.
About 40.
Yes.
Are all of these still existing, or are
No.
some lost?
No, some are lost. Some of the early ones are lost.
Since 1931, say, dirigible, are all of those still existing?
It is possible that all of them are still existing, except for one Lady for a Day. The negative of Lady for a Day is lost. There are a couple of prints existing of Lady for a Day that might be used to make dupe negatives from.
You filmed the Lindsay Krause play, Arsenic and Old Lace.
Arsenic and Old Lace, yes.
And how did you like that film yourself when you saw it?
I loved it. That was a very funny film.
It played before a college audience recently, and the audience just loved it. It was a full house, and they laughed till the tears rolled down
Oh,
their
I'm
face.
glad.
It was an absolutely timeless thing.
Yes, well, that's the way it affected me, too. But I saw the play, and I wanted to do that very badly.
It brought up the very definite thought that this kind of comedy, which was shot in, 41? This sort of thing is very, very adaptable today, and of course there's nothing being made like that on films that I know of. The situation we're into with television, with films today, is a far different thing. They're making a very different kind of film. I'd like to, if I could, quote something from your book concerning films today, because I think it's...
That's what happens when you write a book. You come back to haunt you.
Well, I shouldn't think this would haunt. But on page 400 of your autobiography, we run across this paragraph. Practically all of the Hollywood filmmaking of today is stooping to cheap, salacious pornography and a crazy bastardization of a great art to compete for the patronage of deviants and masturbators. If that isn't a slide from films, it'll do until a real avalanche hits our film mecca. Well, first of all, let me say I completely agree. You could go even further and include the sadists, because they seem to have a significant part in today's filmmaking. Why? What's happened to filmmaking that the people who put together all of this money and all of this talent should produce that kind of film rather than something which is designed for entertainment?
Well, most of the film today is being produced by independent producers. That is the old studio system where they produce 40, 50 pictures in one studio is gone. And today it is, the system is roughly that you finance one picture at a time. And when you do that, you become very conservative, because if you don't make profit with that one film, you may not finance the next one. If you don't make a profit with two films, you have a very difficult time going on. So profits are the principal thing today. The films must make a profit. And so what happens is that the so-called independent producers, who should be very innovative and try to make new things, new ideas, experiment, they're not. They are following each other. Now along comes Godfather, a big hit. Now we get a whole line of the Godfathers coming out on the same on the principle of violence. Along comes something else. I'm Curious Yellow, hit from Sweden, explicit sex, a big hit. Then all we get now is explicit sex, whether the story calls for it or not. And we have they are followers today, trend followers, not trend makers, and it is mostly because they want to find out that they think past performances will assure them profits. That's the last thing that will assure them, because the trend makers make the money, but the trend followers do not. And this is a setup today in Hollywood and all places that is a sorry one. They're making pornographic pictures, and they're making violently, savagely violent pictures because they think you can't get that on television. That's why the reason people go to the theaters is to see something they can't see on television, and that is it is not so. They'll go to see a film, providing it entertains them and lifts them, and provided it gives them something about stories about human beings, not stories about human lepers. The creep heroes, of course, and they're going out. They're going out of circulation. And they should go out. And the quicker we return to making films that will entertain, uplift, and not entirely degrade the human spirit, why, the better it'll be for us and for our country, because I think films not only reflect the times, but they also affect the times. And
why do you think television has failed to fill this void? What they've come through with, of course, are thumb-sucking situation comedies and melodramas. And when they attempt dramatic films, usually they're nothing but very mechanical mystery thrillers. And crime shows and mystery thrillers seem to be the only thing on television in these years, the early 70s, which appear to show any inventive talent.
Television eats up material faster than it can be produced, and it eats it up. So the material you get on television is generally rather half-baked, not fully developed. Somebody used to work on a play. Playwrights used to work on a play 4 years. Now they got 2 weeks to write an hour play, and naturally it's half-baked. Naturally it's something like something else. It isn't time, and so that the people that are not allowed enough time for those shows that they make on television, that are now on films. That's why films seem better than the shows you get on television, principally because more time is devoted, more people are allowed to develop, polish, A film that costs $4 million is bound to be something that costs $100,000 because of just the actual time necessary to do it. Not so much the talent as the time and the attention that is given.
What about the money available to writers? For instance, the short story that became the basis for It Happened One Night. As I recall from your book, I think the short story was $5,000, which
Right.
was considered a low price to pay at the time.
Yes, yes.
Today, what would they be paying for the rights to a short story which would be expandable?
Well, if they think it's something big, I mean, the money that is paid for, say, a best-selling book is tremendous. $1 million, $500,000.
Are short stories still being bought?
Short stories, you can get $100,000 for them if they can develop them into a film. Yes, of course. Now, that doesn't mean every short story that gets that, but I mean one that is really wanted and somebody thinks they want to spend a lot of money on it. If they're going to spend $4 or $5 million on something, they want something that costs more than $5,000.
They just feel better about spending the money.
They feel better about spending the money, yes.
I'd like to look into something else in your book, which is a personal statement on the aspects of filmmaking, and I'm going to read this. It's several paragraphs long. There is a type of writing which some critics deploringly call the gee whiz school. The authors, they point out, wander about wide-eyed and breathless, seeing everything as larger than life. If my films and this book smack here and there of gee whiz, well, gee whiz to some of us. To some of us, all that meets the eye is larger than life, including life itself. Who can match the wonder of it? Despite his lean, bare prose, Hemingway was a gee whizzer. The adrenals of all his character were oversized, as were his own. He lived, wrote, and died in a fireworks display. Gauguin was a gee whizzer. He painted the South Seas not as he found them, but as he wanted to find them. He created his own South Seas. Homer's heroes were superheroes: Paris, Helen of Troy, Achilles, Hector, Odysseus. Plutarch's lives were superheroes. And what of the prophets and apostles of biblical times? Moses, Peter, David, and Paul. Those were men to match anyone's mountains. We, the gee whizzers, euphemistically say we are of the upbeat school, in contrast to the downbeaters, whom we non-euphemistically relegate to the ashcan school, because their films depict life as an alley of cats clawing lids off garbage cans, and man as less noble than a hyena. The ashcanners, in turn, call us Pollyannas, mawkish sentimentalists, and corny happy enders. These are the Hollywood filmmakers, Mr. Upbeat and Mr. Downbeat. One hopes to be righter than right, and the other righter than wrong. And in the middle is Mr. In-Between. Yet we all respect and admire each other because the great majority freely express their own individual artistry, unfettered by subsidies or strictures from government, pressure groups, or ideologists. This was written not too many years ago.
Yes.
I assume you still hold with what you said there.
Yes, indeed, yes.
Now, would I be putting you on the spot if I asked for some examples in great directors, contemporaries of yours, who would fit into the upbeat, the downbeat, and the in-between?
Well, yes, you would be putting me on the spot because that's a critical appraisal of my fellow directors, which is that I'm not really equipped to make, and I should not make, because they all do things in a different way. They all see things in a different way, and they're entitled to see things in a way. And I'm not here to blame them or castigate them in any way for what they do. I think it's just drama is just as dramatic as comedy. Comedy is just as dramatic as drama, and just as important, by the way. And so I won't, because I'm an upbeat man, I'm not going to say he's a downbeat man, therefore I downgrade him. No, I do not. I may not like the Bergman, the Swedish. I think he deals. I think he deals too much with death and decomposition of the human spirit, but that doesn't mean that I don't have to admire him, because he can do that stuff better than anybody else in the world. So I love everybody and I admire everybody, and I take off my hat to everybody that can make a film of any kind. It's a big job.
Let me approach this from a different way. Of the directors who were contemporaries of yours in the 30s and 40s, was there any director, or were there any directors, whose work you particularly enjoyed?
I enjoyed it. Yes, a great many directors. I enjoyed the films of Howard Hawks, John Ford, Leo McCarey, Henry King. You want any more? I can give you lots of them.
Yes.
These were all giant filmmakers in a way, and I enjoyed every kind of film they made. And they weren't all upbeat, and they weren't all downbeat. But they were true expressions of themselves.
Are you willing to cite a director you think might be perhaps the finest director who ever worked?
Finest director that ever worked? Well, I think the finest, the most versatile director that ever worked is John Ford.
What were some of the strengths in his approach?
Were some of the strengths of his approach? Well, he had a great figure and a great ability to tell a tale, and his heroes were bigger than life, and there was great entertainment in his films and great poetry in his films.
One of the things that comes through in your films, and I believe in your book, is an unusual ability on your part to measure a person, whether he was an actor or someone working with you, to know what his strong points and weak points were, and not only to want to be able to bring out the strong points, but to actually be able to do it, to have the talent to work with him as man to man and to bring these out. Was this a natural talent that you had, or was it something that you learned how to do and perfected?
Well, I would suppose it. I suppose it is a natural talent. I mean, I'd have to have. I didn't go around, go to school to learn it, I think. So, but I did recognize that the situation as it was, and the situation in the film is this: stars put their whole career on the line on the judgment of one man, the director. Therefore, it is a director's medium. He's the only one that they can look to for judgment, and they can look to for help. And if the association between that star and the director is a happy one, then it's a symbiotic thing. We help each other. But if it is an unhappy one, then the stars become a little worried about their own careers, and you get spotty things when they don't agree as to exactly how to play the part. So therefore, by one of my principal virtues was that I tried to understand that actor, how to get the best performance out of that particular actor. And no two are alike. But my job was to get the best performance out of that person that was possible for that particular part.
Sometimes it appears that, as a general has to be, a director sometimes has to be a bit self-sacrificial in sacrificing certainly his own ego and sometimes other things in order to get the most out of a star.
Because he understands that this is a people-to-people communication. People come in, audiences come into theaters not to get ego-massaging curiosities from the director or from the writer or from the cameraman. They don't care less about gimmicks, about the up shots, down shots, zoom shots. They don't mean a thing to them. Those are just gimmicks. But they do care what happens to those people. The actors are the direct communicators to the people. It's the lives of those actors and the characters they represent that is interesting to people. People are interested in people, not in gimmicks, not in things. Now, if you understand that, then as a director, you get out of the way. As a cameraman, you get out of the way. As a musician, you get out of the way. You help the actors tell their tale.
Very fine. Thank you very much. I wish we had more time, but this is, unfortunately, just a half-hour interview. We've been watching Virginia Viewpoints. Our guest today, the eminent film director, Mr. Frank Capra. My name is Ray Barry. Mr. Capra, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Get into what we didn't have time. It happened one night in the has to be a director, sometimes has to be a bit a bit self-sacrificial in
Understands that
things in order to get the most out of a star.
because he understands that this is a people-to-people communication.